How often do you eat every day? 2 times, 3 times, 4 times? Lots of times. We all need food to keep us happy and healthy, don't we? If we don't, then we start to get really slow and tired and starving. But at the same time, if we eat too much food, then we start to get a bit fat. The truth is, we all need just the right amount of food in order to keep us happy and healthy, and for you guys to help you grow. Things like vegetables and fruits and bread. In the story today, we're going to look at Jesus when he's been talking to a really large group for hours and hours and hours. His disciples, well, they come to him because really, they're getting a bit hungry and they're a bit worried about all these people. The story is called The Feeding of the 5,000. That is a lot of people. 5,000. But the truth is, we don't actually know how many people were really there. See, in those days, crowds of those kind of numbers, only the men were counted. Women and children, they were kind of ignored. So the truth is, it could have been 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 even. If all the 5,000 men that came had come with a wife and 2 children, that's like an entire football stadium full of people. That's a lot. Keep that in mind as we go through this story. After speaking to this crowd for hours and hours, the disciples come to Jesus and they suggest that maybe now's the time to send them all away so they can go and get something to eat. But Jesus tells them they need not go away. You give them something to eat. Matthew 14, verse 16. How are we supposed to do that, they think? Well, they scout around and eventually they find one young boy who has 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish with him. Well, it's a start, but remember the crowd of people. How is this going to feed them? But Jesus, he's more confident. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing over them. Luke 9, verse 16. So Jesus takes the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish, and he gives thanks to God for them. And then comes time to give them to the crowd. Now, I didn't want to use bread for this in case I wasted it. So I've got bits of wood to represent the bread. And well, I think they would have used baskets, but probably not like this fancy picnic basket. But it's all I've got, so it's going to have to do. So Jesus would have taken the bread and put it into the basket and the fish. Then he gives it to the disciples and off they go. But they must have thought, he's being a bit crazy. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, that would probably have been enough to feed the 13 of them. 14 if you include the little boy who actually bought the bread and fish. But there are thousands and thousands of people here. How is this going to feed all of them? But the disciples are obedient. Jesus has told them to go, so they go and give out the bread and the fish. And so they start to give out this stuff to the men and to the women and to the children. And they keep going. And it must have been very quick that they realised something strange is happening because, well, they're still going and going and going and, well, going. In fact, the Bible actually says, and they all ate and were satisfied. Mark 6, verse 42. How's that happened? Not just that. Jesus tells them to go around and pick up all the leftovers. So they gathered them up and they filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. John 6, verse 13. 12 baskets. 12! They started with 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish. They have fed thousands and thousands of people. And somehow, not only is everybody full, but they've got more in leftovers than they started with. How has that happened? What is going on? Jesus is clearly trying to demonstrate something to his disciples. But what is it? Now, the more eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that the 4 different verses I used each come from a different book of the Bible. One from Matthew, one from Mark, one from Luke, and one from John. That's because this miracle that Jesus performs is actually told in all 4 of the Gospels. That's how important it is. The same story told 4 times by 4 different people. But what is it that Jesus is trying to demonstrate? Well, a little bit later on, he tells his disciples, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger. Whoever believes in me shall not thirst." John 6, verse 35. Ah, you think. So, what Jesus is saying is if I believe in him, that he will always send me pizza. That's not really what he means, is it? When Jesus calls himself the bread of life, what he means is that, like our bodies, our spirits, our souls, they need feeding too. When Jesus calls himself the bread, what he means is he's able to feed our souls. That every time we spend time with him, whether it's in prayer, whether it's reading the Bible, whether it's singing songs of praise, it's like eating that spiritual bread to feed our souls. And because it comes from God, it is a never-ending supply. There is always more than enough to satisfy our hunger. God is able to meet the needs of his people. The people at the side of the lake listening to Jesus, at that point, they needed food. They needed the bread and the fish, and God provided. We need encouraging and building up in our souls. And God is able to provide that too. So this week, for your verse to learn, I want you to learn that verse from John 6, verse 35. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall not thirst. And just remember that the only real way to feed our souls is to place our trust in him and to spend time with him in his word, praying to him and singing to him. Now, one last thing while I've still got you. And staying on the subject of food, I'm sure you've noticed that Christmas is getting close. And I'm sure that you're getting really, really excited, aren't you? But there are lots and lots of people who maybe aren't quite as excited. Lots of people and families who are struggling to feed themselves and struggling to get by. Well, maybe you'd like to help them have a slightly better Christmas. UBC have decided to join with the Crossroads Community Hub on Dixon's Drive to help deliver food parcels for lots of families in the local area. Families who maybe aren't having the best of times at the moment. If you or your family would like to help support this, then please get in touch and we can tell you what sort of thing needs to be donated, and we can even arrange to pick up your donation. UBC is delighted to be able to show God's love for us through our provision and support of other people through the food bank. And hopefully this is something we can do long into the future, for as long as it's needed. And I hope that if you're able to, you'll be able to get involved and help too.